Hey everyone, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to be talking about conclusions. In my last video, we talked about introduction strategy. So we're going to shift gear towards the end of your papers, and we're going to focus on how to make a good conclusion and what those should look like, and basically how to make them better. So they're just like introductions, conclusions do three things, although their three things are a little less than the introduction. So which I'll explain, but the first thing that they do is they take all of your main claims of your essay and they remind the reader what your main claims were. So what was the main point of your essay and what were the main reasons that you used to explain it? They also answer the so what question to what you stated in your thesis. So like, you told me what the point of your essay was. Now, why should the reader care? What is the point of it? And then the third thing that they do is to place your argument in a larger context. So what that essentially means is to how can they take your argument and relate it to the real world, to their life, to their community, to the whole world in general. So that's what conclusions should do. They don't do it's not a lot of stuff you have to write. It's usually only like 3 to 4 sentences, but they should be pretty impactful though. It shouldn't be like, oh yeah, now I'm done, moving on. So you really want to make the reader care about what you just told them, essentially. So here are the 5 strategies. So the first one is echo the intro. Just like the inverted triangle, this is probably the most popular conclusion. A lot of people get it misconstrued with repeating the introduction, because you don't want to necessarily just repeat the introduction. For one thing, it's repetitive. Two, there's no really point to doing it, but you do want to like take some ideas or phrases from the first one and then reintroduce those phrases to remind them about what happened at the beginning. So what an example of an echo the intro is this is from the inverted triangle that we talked about in the previous video about the weather, bad weather, rainstorm of 1996, and how they learned from that frightening experience. So the conclusion, if you notice, the bold words are pretty similar. They're not 100% exact, but they're similar enough to where they're basically the same thing. So here's the conclusion for echo the intro. That September day, bad weather changed the shape of my life. What started as a frightening experience turned into a learning experience, teaching me that I can survive the unexpected, that I can think clearly in emergency, and that I should never leave the house unprepared. So again, it talked about like the different, like the main claim was how they learned from their frightening experience, and they talked about like the little mini claims that they had made throughout their paper. One important thing to know for a conclusion, you should never give new information that wasn't already in the rest of the essay. So like, you shouldn't say, oh yeah, by the way, I forgot to mention this as another good reason. If you have a good reason, it should be in the middle of your essay. You should only be like summarizing almost like what was important about your paper in the conclusion, basically. Okay, next one. So that was echo the intro. This is challenge the reader. After they've read your essay, challenging the reader tells your reader that this is what I want you to do next with the information that I've given you. So whether it's a like actual action that you want them to do, or if you want them to change their mind about something or change their perspective, I challenge you to think differently about this. Those are all different ways that you could challenge the reader. So here is an example of challenging the reader. There's 2 types. There's realistic and unrealistic. You always want to be realistic with your challenges. So here's a realistic. Now that you know how much personal water use impacts our reserves here in California, I challenge you to set a timer when you shower and reduce your shower time to 4 minutes. If you have a lawn, reduce your watering to 8-minute cycles 2 days per week. These small changes could save 10,000 gallons per year per user. That sounds very realistic. You just have them like take shorter showers, change a little dial on the sprinkler, and that's pretty easy to do. Unrealistic is, now that you know how much water storage is needed for the next drought, I challenge you to pass a new law to build more water storage. Run for the state assembly so you can make some real legislative changes, and then donate at least $10,000 to your local water district. Again, it's not realistic to expect people to do any of those things. Some of them it's unrealistic because the amount of money. Some of it's unrealistic because the expectations are pretty high, like being able to run for state assembly. Only a few people can do that. Not everyone can do that. So you want to make sure that you are giving them realistic things that the majority of people can do. All right, moving on. Okay. After challenge a reader, we have looked to the future conclusions, which basically is like, here's a hypothetical of what the future is going to look like if you are able to do what I'm telling you to do in my paper. So here's an example of look to the future. And just like challenge a reader, there's 2 types, but the difference is these 2 types are good. So you have the scary, everyone is going to die version, or the good, everything is going to be okay version. So the first one, if we don't start paying attention to the warnings of climate scientists, the Earth will face more storms that increase in violence and frequency. The devastation we've seen from Superstorm Sandy or Hurricane Harvey may be just the beginning. So that gives like people a warning about what's going to happen if they don't make changes based off of their paper. Now here's the everything's glass half full version. If you make the changes that I've outlined today, we will see an immediate improvement in our CO2 levels, a decrease in our carbon emissions, lower global temperatures, and fewer forest fires. Imagine our national parks being restored to the pristine beauty of 200 years ago before the Industrial Revolution. In less than 30 years, if we follow the plan recommended in this essay. So again, here's a good future that's going to happen if you do what I asked you to do. So again, either way works. It just kind of depends on the situation, your personality. Just again, try to be as authentic as possible. All right, next one. So this is our fourth one, actually. Kind of got confused on the number there. So posing the question is like interrogative. You have questions, a series of questions that get answered, that were answered in your essay. So the only difference is in the interrogative, you have to start your question or your introduction with a sentence explaining your topic. You've already explained your topic, so you don't have to reintroduce the topic in your conclusions. So here are a couple examples. Have you ever questioned the motives of your favorite authors? Have you wondered what drove them to create the characters and situations they did, or what they were hoping to accomplish? Now that you have a better understanding of Boyle's motives, you can revisit your favorite authors and ask yourself what they were trying to prove. Or here's another example. Are you as happy as you could be? Have you been looking to money for happiness, or have you looked to a higher power? Think about what hasn't brought you happiness and ask yourself if it's time for something new. So again, just like the interrogative, 3 questions that were answered in your paper, and then end with like a so what statement, like why should I care? Okay, so interrogative, start with a statement, 3 questions, cease a statement, pose a question, 3 questions, so what statement. Okay, so that's what you need to have in there. And again, if you start off your essay with an interrogative, don't end with a pose a question. You shouldn't start and end your paper with questions. It makes you sound confused and like you don't know what you're talking about. All right, finally, we're at conclude with a quote. Concluding with a quote is basically where you would literally like look for a quote online from something that somebody said. Now, when you're Googling, don't type in the word quote, because you're going to get a lot of probably not great sources. So just like search the topic and look for some things that people said, and that'll give you a better idea of what you can do for a conclude with a quote. So here's an example of a conclude with a quote conclusion. As the Dalai Lama said, our prime purpose in this life is to help others. And if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. Now notice this is multiple sentences long. So if you do this, you should find a quote that is multiple sentences that helps prove your point about your essay. If you can't find one that's that long, I would recommend doing an echo the intro conclusion and then add a small quote at the end to kind of like emphasize your point. So those were the 5 different conclusion strategies. Again, just like with the introduction, I asked you guys to complete this writing prompt. Again, you didn't have to write the whole essay, just the introduction and conclusion. If you write the entire essay, it would be extra credit, although you would have to have some research to help you in your body paragraphs prove your point. But again, if you have any questions, you could send me a remind message. You can ask me in class, tutorial. You can leave a comment in the video. Either way, I hope this was helpful.